Well, everything just changed forever. And in today's video, we're going to talk about why. Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Well, we're in a very volatile interregnum period right now. A restructuring of the post-World War II global financial and military order is underway right now. And its latest incarnation is the result of the Trump tariffs announced on Wednesday. So today we're going to talk about why this is, what it means, what the mainstream corporate media doesn't yet understand, what most Americans don't yet understand, and how all of this is likely to play out. So guys, I spent a good portion of yesterday trying to wrap my mind around how can I very clearly and concisely communicate what's happening and what all of this means. So let's start right here. So this is a tweet from Luke Groman, and he says, low tariffs on the world's factories were part and parcel of the post-1971 structure of the US dollar reserve status. And guys, we've talked about that. We've talked a lot about what happened in August 1971 on this channel over and over again. And he says, now that US tariffs are no longer low, the next shoe to drop will be a change to the post-1971 structure of the US dollar reserve status. And guys, this is why everything just changed forever. We've been seeing these changes slowly happen over time. We've commented on these changes. And as we just talked about, I believe it was Wednesday's video, we had the Sun Also Rises quote by Ernest Hemingway, where he was asked, how did you go bankrupt? And he said, it said slowly, then all at once. So we're not talking about bankruptcy here, but we're talking about the US dollar reserve currency status, slowly and then all at once. And I think Wednesday historically will be seen as a turning point. We'll talk about why that is. I think with this is there. It was up in the air, at least for me anyway. Is Trump trying to negotiate better trade deals or just institute tariffs? And I think what he's doing is he's targeting these trade deficits. The structure of those tariffs tells us that, because he wants to reshore American manufacturing. He wants to bring jobs back to America for Main Street. We've known that. He's said that. But he also sees there's a problem, a national security issue, when much of our military supply chain is manufactured by rivals like China. So he wants to reshore and reindustrialize America. Bring jobs back to America. All of that is a great goal to have. And therefore, these tariffs are announced. But there is a problem that he faces with this. So let's take a look at this right here. So this is from a website, CTOL Digital Solutions. This will give us some insight into the problem that the Trump administration faces. So it's titled, Why the U.S. Trade Deficit Keeps Growing Despite Tariffs and a Strong Economy. And it says, in a world where trade balances are watched as barometers of national economic strength, one country stands out for consistently breaking the rules, the United States. Since the 1970s, let's note that, August 1971, right? It has run the largest and most persistent trade deficits on the planet. Year after year, administration after administration, regardless of economic cycle. Even aggressive efforts to fix this imbalance, most notably under President Trump's trade wars with China, Canada, and Mexico, have done little to reverse the trend. In fact, in times of economic strength, the U.S. trade deficit often grows even larger. This isn't just a quirk of policy. It's a feature of a system that ties together global finance, fiscal policy, and the unique role of the US dollar. So again, this is a feature of the dollar as the global reserve currency, and a history of US treasuries as the global reserve asset. We've talked about this a number of times, but it causes a problem. If the goal is to get rid of those trade deficits and to bring industry back into the United States, to reindustrialize, reinvigorate America's manufacturing base and supply chains, well, we have a problem. And this article notes that problem. It actually has a name. It's called Triffin's Dilemma. So this says, in the 1960s, economist Robert Triffin warned that any country issuing the world's reserve currency would face a conflict. It would need to run trade deficits to supply the world with liquidity, in this case, dollars. But doing so would eventually undermine confidence in that currency, dollars. This is now known as Triffin's Dilemma. It says, did you know that the Triffin Dilemma highlights a fundamental conflict faced by countries whose currency serves as the global reserve currency? This paradox arises because a country must run trade deficits to supply enough currency for global use. Again, in this case, dollars. Dollars are the dominant currency used in international trade, which can erode confidence in the currency over time. This creates tension between domestic economic goals, such as keeping people employed, having a manufacturing base, having secure supply chains. It says such as maintaining low unemployment and stable growth, and international responsibilities, such as providing liquidity for global trade. The dilemma was notably relevant under the Bretton Woods system, where the US dollar's role led to unsustainable deficits. And that's why Nixon severed the dollar's convertibility with gold. He ended that. And it continues to pose challenges today as the dollar remains the dominant reserve currency. And I would say that it remains, well, again, we're in this interregnum period. It remains the dominant currency in international trade, and I don't think that's going to end soon. But we'll talk more about what's happening as we go through this video. It says the U.S. is living this paradox in real time. It must continue to run deficits to maintain the dollar's dominance. But the larger the imbalance grows, the more exposed the system becomes to shocks, whether through geopolitical tension, we'll talk about that in a moment, monetary tightening, or loss of faith in U.S. fiscal discipline, which we've seen a lot of that as well. And so this concludes in something that we can learn from. It says the U.S. trade deficit is not simply an economic flaw to be fixed. It is a structural outcome of a global system that revolves around the dollar, financial markets, and a consumption-led growth model. Efforts to, quote, rebalance trade without addressing underlying capital flows, fiscal behavior, and the dollar's role are unlikely to succeed. And I think that's the lesson we need to take from this. We've talked about we're coming to the end of the monetary system that has dominated the world since August of 1971. Really, this dollar-dominated global financial system that's ruled the world since the end of World War II, that's coming to an end. And we've talked about why that is. We've talked about things like the pullout of Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia ending the petrodollar and saying they're going to sell oil and other currencies. We've talked about the BRICS nations and their efforts to de-dollarize and to get out of the system. The impact of the sanctions on Russia following the Russia-Ukraine war and kicking Russia out of the SWIFT system, and all of these different things that we could see happening that are telling us the end of this order was coming, and one of those was gold. Central banks piling up gold at rates we had not seen since the late 1960s, just before Nixon ended the Bretton Woods Agreement that had been in place since 1944 and severed the dollar's convertibility to gold, and we ended up in this petrodollar system that we've been in since then. So we know the world has been trying, much of the world anyway, the BRICS nations and a lot of the world have been trying to rid themselves of this dollar system. And they've been doing that not in terms of the dollar as international trade currency, but U.S. treasuries as their reserve asset. That's why we've seen central banks turn to gold as that reserve asset of choice rather than treasuries, because they know that its confidence has been undermined in the ability of the United States to pay back its debts in terms of the purchasing power of those dollars that those debts would be paid back with. So none of that's new, but what I think is new that we can be clear about as of Wednesday is the Trump administration knows this, and the Trump administration has taken this on and said, yes, we think this system is a problem too. And we're going to take efforts to end it. Because again, as we just read there, you can't end U.S. trade deficits and have the world's global reserve currency. A new system has to be put in place, and they're pushing to put that new system in place. And I think that's why we saw articles like this that we discussed at the time. So this is from back in January. UK faces gold shortages. Traders send $82 billion worth of gold to New York in anticipation of Trump tariffs. And we said at the time, I don't think it's Trump tariffs. Now, the Trump tariffs are a symptom, you could call it, of this change that is taking place. But the gold is either brought in there's only really two reasons this gold would be making this shift. People see this change coming, and they want an asset that doesn't have counterparty risk for the turbulent times that lie ahead. And or the Trump administration is reshoring gold ahead of their attempts to reshore American manufacturing in order to establish this new system where, again, no longer the U.S. Treasury is no longer the world's reserve asset. Gold is. So prior to August 1971, that was the case throughout economic history. Gold was money. As J.P. Morgan once said, gold is money, everything else is credit. And credit has counterparty risk to it. You're relying on the other person fulfilling their obligation. The world is no longer willing to rely on the United States to fulfill its obligation to pay back their debts in terms of dollars that still retain the purchasing power they anticipated they would have. And so I think what the Trump administration is trying to do here is they're trying to reshore manufacturing for all the reasons we talked about. I think they're also trying to facilitate a crash in financial markets, and that may sound strange, not for nefarious reasons, but to get the interest rates down, because the only way the Fed can cut rates in this environment, and frankly, the Fed doesn't cut rates, the market determines those rates. The Fed generally follows along. But if we see people pouring into U.S. treasuries and those yields go down, their hope is, anyway, that that's what will happen. This is a very risky, dangerous game. I don't know how this will turn out specifically, but their hope is that U.S. treasuries will become a safe haven. The interest, the yields on those will go down, and then our national debt can be refinanced at lower rates just before the dollar is depreciated relative to other currencies in the hope of onshoring. This is, I believe, what they're trying to do. I don't think all of that's going to happen the way they think that it's going to happen, but I think that is what is taking place because, guys, we are in a change. And a reader reached out recently and asked about a specific piece of content that is something I'd said, and I sent them this. I think this is worth revisiting in light of all of this to provide context for what is happening and how significant this is. So this is from almost a year ago. So 5 days, it'll be a year from now, or a year ago. It says, why does the world seem to be in a constant state of crisis? It says, for over 4 years now, almost everyone who pays attention to what's going on in the world lives in a constant state of anxiety. Well, the reason? They're waiting for the next shoe to drop, the next major global event that will upend their lives. And this is understandable. Over the past 4 years, we've endured COVID, the government response to COVID, all the lockdowns, passports, mandates, etc., global supply chain issues, global inflation, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel, the shutdown of Red Sea shipping lanes, and numerous rumors of other major events set to break at any moment. So what's next? Will it get worse before it gets better? The answer is yes, and this article reveals why. The interregnum. One of the reasons we see all of these events taking place is the interregnum. What does that mean? Well, the American Heritage Dictionary of English Language defines it as the interval of time between the end of a sovereign's reign and the accession of a successor. This typically describes a time period between two reigning kings, but in this instance, we're using it to describe the time period between one superpower or group dominating global affairs and a second rising to take its place. The last time we experienced an interregnum of this type was the 1914 to 1945 timeframe. Needless to say, this was quite a tumultuous era, 31 years that included 2 world wars and a global depression. When 1914 started, the Royal Navy of the British Empire ruled the high seas. The colonies of the British Empire spanned the globe, and it had dominated the 19th century global order, controlling the world's shipping lanes, issuing the world's global reserve currency, and boasting the world's premier center of international finance. When 1945 ended, the United States ruled the high seas. U.S. military bases spanned the globe, and the United States dominated the 20th century global order, controlling the world's shipping lanes, issuing the world's global reserve currency, and boasting the world's premier center of international finance. As 2024 begins, we see U.S. naval power waning. Houthi rebels have shut down the Red Sea to all traffic from Israel, the United States, and their Western allies. Almost 12% of all global trade passes through the Suez Canal, making the Red Sea one of the most vital shipping corridors in the world. For over 80 years, the U.S. Navy has carried out the role of ensuring the world's shipping lanes remain freely navigable and open to international trade. Now, they are increasingly unable to do so. The ability of the U.S. to project military power across the globe and secure vital waterways is one of the primary reasons the U.S. dollar dominates international trade. Another reason is the petrodollar. When President Nixon ended the U.S. dollar's convertibility to gold, it became a fiat currency, meaning its value is derived from nothing more than government edict. Since that day in 1971, all the world's major currencies have been fiat currencies, something unprecedented in history. History shows all fiat currencies eventually reach their intrinsic value, 0. So what happens when all the world's currencies collapse at the same time? In 1974, Henry Kissinger brokered a deal with Saudi Arabia wherein OPEC agreed to only trade oil for dollars. This has helped underpin demand for U.S. dollars for the past 50 years, but now the petrodollar is ending. Saudi Arabia and OPEC are increasingly accepting other currencies for oil. U.S. debt is at unsustainable levels. Foreign nations are dumping U.S. debt in favor of gold. And the BRICS nations are attempting to create an alternative to the U.S.-dominated global financial system. In other words, the post-World War II order of global military power is transforming, and the current global monetary system is coming to an end. All this and more is why we see U.S. power and influence in decline, an increasingly fragmented global order, and a world where it seems we're moving from one crisis to the next. Guys, I'll pin a link to this article at the top of the comments if you want to read the rest of this, because I think ultimately where all of this is going, what all this signals, and why we see, why does the world seem to be in a constant state of crisis? Because Jesus is coming. These are birth pains. But what we're witnessing and what we're talking about in today's video is this end to the U.S. dollar, and specifically, this is I believe the final nail in the coffin for the U.S. Treasury as the world's central reserve asset for central banks. It has been replaced completely by gold. We've been seeing that happen slowly, and then all at once. It happened all at once on Wednesday. I think history will show, because the Trump administration has made a policy decision that they want that too. The rest of the world has been moving toward that. And now the Trump administration is saying, yes, we need to do that for these various reasons. And guys, it's going to happen anyway, because again, we see this. Now, when we talked about the ability for the United States Navy to open up the Red Sea, when Operation Prosperity Guardian launched in December 2023, I said they will not be able to open it because U.S. conventional military power, the power they were using, is obsolete in the face of the drones that are coming at them. So nothing short of a full-on invasion of Yemen would stop these attacks. And I said at the time, even though Joe Biden was weak, it's not a matter of policy, it's a matter of ability. Doesn't matter who's in the White House. That's proved to be true because we see articles like this from Tuesday. It says, Iran incredibly weakened by over 200 U.S. strikes on Houthis, according to the White House. It says the White House on Tuesday declared that Iran has been incredibly weakened as a result of the Pentagon operation against Yemen's Houthis, which was renewed on March 15th by President Trump and his National Security Cabinet. This goes on. It says the group has fired at least 8 ballistic missiles on Israel over the past week, but the U.S. is leading the way in anti-Houthi operations, and they have been for how many months now? 16 months. There have now been more than 200 successful strikes, Levitt said. Again, you could go back to the Biden administration and hear the same things being said. Iran is incredibly weakened as a result. They've taken out Houthi leaders, critical members who have been launching strikes on naval ships and commercial vessels. This operation will not stop until the freedom of navigation in this region is restored. Well, that's what we were told back in December 2023. We're still waiting. The Houthis haven't confirmed the deaths of any leaders, nor has the U.S. side acknowledged the repeated attacks on U.S. warships or the carrier USS Truman. It says both sides appear content to keep mum on the extent of the success of the back-and-forth attacks. But the consensus among war analysts is that if the Houthi threat to Red Sea shipping is to be rooted out, it will take a long, sustained campaign, which we should note has not had formal war authorization from Congress. Quote, folks say, we'll go in there and take out everyone with the last name Houthi and we'll win. The Houthi leadership has been taken out in history in the past, and they're resilient, said retired U.S. Navy Vice Admiral Kevin Donegan. They came back and they grew stronger. So this isn't something that's a one and done. And he's right. It's not a one and done. It isn't happening. The United States, again, the conventional military power, the nuclear capability of the United States is still there for the moment, thankfully. But conventional U.S. military power, the ability to open up these waterways, is gone. And that's why we're seeing this. We see it again from the same day. Houthis say they've downed 16th Reaper drone after Trump warned real pain yet to come. It says on Tuesday, the Houthis, officially known as Ansar Allah, claimed they had shot down another American MQ-9 Reaper drone while it was flying over Yemen. Our air defenses successfully shot down an American MQ-9 Reaper drone while it was carrying out hostile missions in the airspace using a suitable, locally made missile, a Houthi military statement said. The U.S. military has not yet confirmed that it lost a drone, but if accurate, this would mark the 16th U.S. MQ-9 drone that's been downed in the region, as the Houthis announced. While the Pentagon has acknowledged the loss of several drones since conducting anti-Houthi operations over the course of the past year, it has not specified or confirmed each and every downing, only leaving its sporadic statements vague. If the Houthis have really downed 16 Reaper drones at this point, that would amount to nearly $500 million in lost military hardware, considering each is commonly estimated to cost about $30 million. Houthi statements throughout the war, going back to October 7th, 2023, tend to be accurate. And I guess that would be their opinion within the article. But this goes on. It says, many of their fighters and leaders are no longer with us, Trump wrote on Truth Social. We hit them every day and night, harder and harder. Their capabilities that threaten shipping in the region are rapidly being destroyed. Our attacks will continue until they are no longer a threat to freedom of navigation. Here we hear this phrase again. This is what we've been saying on this channel since this Operation Prosperity Guardian was launched. This is critical to have the U.S. role in projecting global military power and having the world's reserve currency. Trump added, the choice for the Houthis is clear. Stop shooting at U.S. ships and we'll stop shooting at you. Otherwise, we have only just begun and the real pain is yet to come for both the Houthis and their sponsors in Iran. The Iran-supported Yemeni militants have vowed to continue fighting so long as Israel's military is active in the Gaza Strip. So far, there's been no hint they'll back down, even in the face of overwhelming U.S. airstrikes. While they face those U.S. airstrikes for 14 months now, and clearly they're not overwhelming. They're just not. That's the reality on the ground. U.S. conventional capabilities are obsolete in an era of drone warfare, and the drones are going to become more sophisticated. They're going to advance rapidly. They are advancing rapidly. We see this on the battlefield in Russia, Ukraine, and U.S. conventional military hardware is being left behind. Unless the United States adapts very quickly to the new reality, their ability to project power around the globe clearly is not there. The world is recognizing this. And we've talked about this ability to project military power around the globe is a result of the US dollar as the world's global reserve currency gives the United States the exorbitant privilege to print dollars to purchase things like oil and drive global trade the way it does, provide liquidity to the global dollar system, which of course gives the United States the economic might to fund a military that projects its power around the globe. This is a, self-reinforcing circle, and it's being broken on both ends. So the United States is no longer able to ensure freedom of navigation of the waterways in the same way that the British Empire was no longer able to do that following World War I. And we're seeing the United States with what Trump did on Wednesday. To me, that's a sign they're taking an active policy stance to say, we need to drop this. Having the world's global reserve currency is an impediment to America first, to having it's hollowed out our manufacturing base. It's causing all these problems. It's made us vulnerable to supply chains in the lands of our enemies. And so we need to end this. And so again, now the United States policy is on board with much of the rest of the world and the BRICS nations in doing this. Again, this doesn't mean the dollar disappears as the dominant trade currency, but it means U.S. treasuries disappear as the world's reserve asset in place, and gold takes its place. This has profound implications. I think what the Trump administration is trying to do here, I probably can't fit all of this into one video. God willing, I'll do another video later today talking about what I think they're trying to accomplish here. But in summation, I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to compress the 1970s into 18 months. They want to inflate the US dollar very quickly in order to lower the debt burden of the United States, and then grow from a new position of strength from there. What I think is likely to happen is, rather than compressing the 1970s into 18 months, we're going to see the 1930s compressed into 18 months. So unfortunately, I don't think this is going to work out the way the Trump administration is hoping. I think it's a valiant attempt at showing leadership to do something that is going to be crushing to many voters. We haven't seen other politicians taking that approach for decades, which is why we're in the situation we're in now. It's because those hard choices haven't been made in the past. But I think we're just simply at a point in time where it's too late. And so back 100 years ago, when the British Empire was no longer able to take on this role, the United States was. The question is, it's not clear at this point who takes on that role if the United States does not. And that's why we have this interregnum period, and it's going to be very volatile. Think of real interregnums, such as when Tsar Nicholas is no longer in power, the Bolshevik Revolution takes place. In between was a series of different leaders that we don't remember. The same thing with the end of Imperial Germany and the rise of Nazi Germany. There was a period called Weimar Germany where there's a whole bunch of things happening in between. We don't tend to think of those periods. We just look at these other periods. But there's a period of volatility and chaos in between, and I think that's where we're at right now. So guys, we have a church dinner we have to go to tonight. My hope is, God willing, I'll be able to put together a video on what's going on in the markets today, what all of this means, expand on that a little bit further on what the Trump administration is trying to do and what's most likely to happen. Because I don't think this is going to turn out the way that they are hoping it's going to turn out. I think it's going to go more the way that we've been saying these things are going to turn out. And then again, God willing, tomorrow, in tomorrow's video on Substack, we're going to talk about the reemergence of the yen carry trade unraveling, the reversal of the yen carry trade. We just talked about that on Wednesday and how it appeared that this was coming. Well, I think it's coming very soon, very, very soon. So stay tuned for the next video, hopefully later today, certainly tomorrow, again, God willing. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Guys, I think Wednesday will be seen as a historic turning point, and will be seen basically as the final nail in the coffin of the U.S. Treasury as central banks' reserve asset, and gold has been vaulted back to the top as the premier asset of central banks all around the world. And that has profound implications for the global financial and military order. Profound implications. So we'll be talking about this a lot in the days and weeks to come, assuming we're still here, because we never know when the rapture is going to come, or I never know what day will be my last. So God willing, we'll talk about those things going forward. But let me know what you think. And God willing, I'll see you later today.